The sight of the human entering his homeworld spaceport sent chills down Pollux' spine, his preconceptions of the primitive, violent species making him almost go into a state of shock, not knowing that this encounter would fundamentally change his entire worldview. Pollux watched as the human male strode purposefully out of the docking bay, the sleek, gleaming transport shuttle from Earth contrasting starkly with his hulking, muscular physique. The human's name was Patrick Campbell, an astronaut selected to take part in the newly initiated cultural exchange program between Earth and the Sheliak homeworld. Pollux had been assigned as Patrick's guide and liaison during the visit, a role the young Sheliak anthropology student accepted with great reluctance. Like most Sheliak, Pollux viewed humans as a barbaric, warlike species, an impression formed from the many bloody and brutal transmissions they had intercepted from Earth over the cycles. Outright savagery seemed to be the default state for these ape descendants. Pollux shuddered, recalling the visceral scenes of cruelty, destruction, and death that played out on those transmissions, humans brutally slaughtering each other in countless wars, subjugating their own kind, ravaging their planet's ecosystems. What kind of species could engage in such wanton violence and still dare to reach for the stars? Humanity seemed doomed to export its self-destructive ways to the rest of the galaxy. But the Sheliak High Council had approved this experiment in interspecies relations with Earth, and Pollux was determined to use it as an opportunity to study the human up close to better understand the enemy. During their first interaction, Patrick seemed to conform to all of Pollux's negative preconceptions about his species. The human was loud, reckless, irreverent toward Sheliak cultural norms, and obsessed with his own selfish whims over the collective good. He barged into restricted areas, touched priceless relics with his grubby hands, and kept wandering off to explore on his own, disregarding all of Pollux's warnings about the dangers. It's like he had a death wish. Things came to a head when an apex predator escaped from a wildlife preserve and began terrorizing a Sheliak settlement near the capital. Enforcers were dispatched to contain the threat, but they would not get there in time before the ravenous beast reached the populated areas. Upon hearing this news, Patrick insisted on rushing to help, despite Pollux's vehement protestations that he stay out of Sheliak affairs. The human just flashed him a wild grin, a fiery glint in his eyes as he said, "Pollux, my friend, on Earth, we don't stand by while innocent lives are in danger. A hero does what's necessary." With that, Patrick grabbed a shuttle and raced towards the besieged settlement, an exasperated Pollux on his heels, pleading for him to stop this madness. Patrick and Pollux's shuttle touched down outside the smoking ruins of what used to be the Wildlife Preserve's containment facility. The gargantuan predator, now freed from captivity, could be heard roaring in the near distance, each chilling vocalization punctuated by the screams of terrified Sheliak. Patrick grabbed a pulse rifle from the shuttle's emergency kit and moved to race towards the sound of the chaos, but Pollux blocked his path, both sets of arms outstretched. "Patrick, stop! This isn't your fight," Pollux pleaded, his voice shaking. "You're not equipped to handle this. Let the enforcers do their job." Patrick shook his head, that same fiery willpower burning in his eyes. "I can't just stand by while lives are at risk, Pollux. It goes against everything I believe in as a human and as a Terran galactic peacekeeper. I have to help." With that, Patrick pushed past the stunned Sheliak and charged toward the sounds of destruction, pulse rifle at the ready. Pollux hesitated for a moment, torn between his duty to keep the human safe and his growing respect for Patrick's bravery. With a frustrated hiss, Pollux sprinted after his friend, determined to face whatever dangers lay ahead together. They emerged into a scene of utter devastation. The monstrous predator, a nightmarish blend of reptile and insect, towered over the smashed remains of Sheliak dwellings, lashing out with razor-sharp claws and snapping its massive jaws at the few remaining stragglers fleeing for their lives. Patrick opened fire immediately, peppering the beast's armored hide with pulse blasts to draw its attention away from the civilians. The creature whirled to face them, its multiple compound eyes fixing on the puny beings that dared to challenge it. With a bone-shaking roar, it charged, its powerful legs eating up the distance at a terrifying speed. Patrick stood his ground, keeping up a steady stream of fire even as Pollux shouted for him to run. At the last moment, just as the predator lunged, its fanged maw wide open to engulf the human whole, Patrick rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding being crushed. The monster's jaws snapped shut on empty air, and Patrick took advantage of its momentary confusion to unleash a barrage of pulse blasts directly into its unarmored underbelly. The predator shrieked in pain and fury, thrashing wildly as it tried to locate its attacker. Patrick kept moving, using the debris from shattered buildings as cover while maintaining his assault. Pollux watched in awe, marveling at the human's agility and quick thinking under pressure. But Patrick's luck couldn't hold out forever. As he darted between cover, the predator's flailing tail caught him broadside, sending him flying. He hit the ground hard, the pulse rifle clattering from his grasp. Momentarily stunned, Patrick could only watch as the enraged beast bore down on him, its maw dripping with caustic saliva. Pollux acted on instinct, snatching up the fallen rifle and putting himself between Patrick and certain death. He opened fire, the pulse blast searing the predator's face and blinding several of its eyes. The creature recoiled with an agonized screech, pawing at its smoldering face. Pollux hauled Patrick to his feet, and together they staggered back, retreating to a safer distance. The monster, now severely wounded and half-blind, thrashed in disoriented rage, smashing indiscriminately into the surrounding structures. The sound of approaching vehicles filled the air as a contingent of heavily armed Shellyak enforcers finally arrived on the scene. Pollux nearly collapsed in relief, but Patrick wasn't ready to relax just yet. He accepted a fresh rifle from one of the enforcers and took up a position on their firing line, ready to put the suffering creature down for good. Under the combined firepower of Patrick and the Shellyak enforcers, the mortally wounded predator shuddered and collapsed, its death throes pulverizing the ground beneath it. As the dust settled and the adrenaline began to fade, Pollux approached Patrick slowly, still trying to process everything he had just witnessed. "Patrick, I've never seen anything like that. The way you fought, the risks you took to save complete strangers." Pollux shook his head in amazement. "Maybe I was wrong about humans. Maybe we have more to learn from your kind than I ever imagined." Patrick clasped Pollux's shoulder, a weary grin on his face. "We've all got a lot to learn from each other, Pollux. That's what this whole cultural exchange is about. Humans and Shellyak, we're not so different when you get down to it. We both want to protect our own, to do what's right. And if we can learn to work together, to trust each other, just imagine what we could accomplish." As medics tended to Patrick's injuries and the enforcers secured the area, Pollux found himself seeing his human companion in a whole new light. Patrick wasn't just some primitive brute. He was a hero, a being of courage and conviction who had risked everything to defend the innocent. In that moment, Pollux knew that no matter what challenges or prejudices they faced, he would stand by Patrick's side, a loyal friend and ally in the fight for understanding between their two species. But even as Pollux and Patrick basked in their hard-won victory and newfound bond, storm clouds of conflict were gathering on the horizon. Neither could have guessed that their friendship was about to be put to the ultimate test, or that the fate of both their worlds would soon hang in the balance. As news of Patrick's heroic exploits spread across the Shellyak homeworld, it stirred up a hornet's nest of controversy. While some hailed the human as a savior and a shining example of the potential for interspecies cooperation, others saw him as a dangerous wild card, an unpredictable element that threatened the stability of Shellyak society. Chief among Patrick's detractors was Rigel, a high-ranking official in the Shellyak government with a deep-seated mistrust of humans. Rigel had opposed the cultural exchange program from the start, viewing it as an unnecessary risk that exposed the Shellyak to the chaos and violence that seemed to follow humanity wherever they went. In the days following the Predator incident, Rigel began publicly denouncing Patrick, using his considerable influence to paint the human as a menace. He cherry-picked examples of humanity's worst moments from their historical records, broadcasting them across Shellyak media to stoke fear and xenophobia. This creature's actions, while seemingly noble on the surface, are a warning of what could happen if we continue to consort with humans, Rigel declared in an impassioned speech before the Shellyak High Council. Their history is one of unrestrained aggression and destructive impulses. How long before they turn those violent tendencies on us? We cannot allow ourselves to be corrupted by their primitive ways. Rigel's fear-mongering found a receptive audience among the more conservative elements of Shellyak society. They latched onto his message, holding up Patrick as a prime example of why humans couldn't be trusted. Public opinion began to turn against the cultural exchange, with more and more Shellyak calling for Patrick to be sent back to Earth and for all ties with humanity to be severed. Pollux did his best to counter Rigel's propaganda, sharing his own positive experiences with Patrick and arguing that the humans' heroism demonstrated the potential for their species to rise above their violent past. But Rigel's message of fear and isolationism was powerful, and Pollux found himself increasingly on the defensive as anti-human sentiment continued to grow. To make matters worse, an extremist faction took Rigel's rhetoric to heart and decided to take matters into their own hands. Led by a radical named Antares, they orchestrated a false flag operation designed to frame Patrick and turn the Shellyak against him once and for all. Antares and his followers staged an attack on a Shellyak research facility, sabotaging critical systems and causing widespread damage. In the chaos, they planted evidence implicating Patrick, making it seem as if the human had been behind the attack as part of a deliberate act of aggression. The sabotage sent shockwaves through Shellyak society, vindicating Rigel's dire warnings about the danger posed by humans. Mobs took to the streets, demanding Patrick's immediate expulsion and an end to any interaction with Earth. The Shellyak government, bowing to public pressure, informed Patrick that they were seriously considering canceling the cultural exchange and sending him back home in disgrace. Patrick was devastated by the news, feeling as if all the progress he and Pollux had made was crumbling around them. He couldn't bear the thought of leaving the Shellyak homeworld with his mission unfulfilled, his dream of fostering understanding between their species shattered by the machinations of a few extremists. But Patrick, being Patrick, refused to go down without a fight. With Pollux's help, he launched his own investigation into the research facility attack, determined to clear his name and expose the real culprits. They combed through the evidence, piecing together the clues that would lead them to Antares and his band of radicals. It was a race against time, with Rigel and his supporters pushing for Patrick's immediate removal, even as Pollux worked tirelessly to prove his friend's innocence. In the end, they managed to unmask Antares and bring his schemes to light, but the damage had already been done. The Shellyak public, whipped into a frenzy by Rigel's fear-mongering, still clamored for Patrick's expulsion. That was when Patrick made his boldest move yet. Instead of meekly accepting defeat, he requested an opportunity to address the Shellyak people directly, to plead his case and show them that humans and Shellyak had far more in common than they realized. It was a risky gambit, one that could easily backfire, but Patrick believed in the power of communication and understanding to bridge even the widest of divides. Pollux, though privately harboring doubts, agreed to help Patrick arrange the broadcast. He knew it might be their last chance to salvage the situation and preserve the fragile bond they had forged between their two species. So, even as Rigel schemed to sabotage the event and ensure Patrick's downfall, Pollux threw himself into the preparations, determined to give his friend the best possible chance to make his case. The stage was set for a climactic showdown, one that would determine not just Patrick's fate, but the future of human-Shellyak relations. With the eyes of an entire world upon him, Patrick stepped up to the podium, ready to bare his soul and speak the truth that could shatter the barriers of fear and prejudice once and for all. But even as Patrick readied himself for the most important speech of his life, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. Rigel, ever the schemer, had one final card to play, a devastating revelation designed to destroy Patrick's credibility and turn the Shellyak against him forever. The question was, would Patrick and Pollux' bond be strong enough to weather the coming storm? Or would Rigel's machinations finally tear them apart, dooming any hope of peace between their peoples? Patrick took a deep breath, his pulse racing as he stood before the holographic camera. Pollux gave him a reassuring nod from behind the control panel. "We're live in 3, 2, 1. The transmission light flashed green, but instead of Patrick's face, the screens across the Sheliak homeworld filled with Rigel's sneering visage. "Citizens of Sheliak, hear me. This human scum seeks to poison our society with his primitive ways." Patrick's jaw dropped. "What the hell?" Pollux's fingers flew across the controls. "He's hijacked our signal. I'm trying to boot him off." On screen, Rigel played doctored footage of Patrick's early days on the planet. There was Patrick, stumbling through a traditional Sheliak greeting ritual, accidentally insulting a high-ranking official. Another clip showed him mistaking a sacred artifact for a piece of garbage. "See how he mocks our customs. This brute has no place among us." Outside, angry voices filled the streets. Crowds gathered, waving anti-human banners. "Pollux, how much longer?" Patrick asked, sweat beading on his forehead. "Almost got it. There." The screen flickered, Rigel's face vanishing mid-rant. Patrick exhaled sharply, straightening his clothes before stepping in front of the camera. The hostile faces of countless Sheliak stared back at him. Patrick swallowed hard, then began to speak. "People of Sheliak, I come before you today with humility and gratitude. I've made mistakes since arriving on your world, and I thank you for your patience as I learned your ways." He went on, describing his awe at Sheliak achievements and expressing his deep respect for their culture. As he spoke, some of the anger in the gathered crowds began to soften. "But it's not just what I've learned from you. My friend Pollux has taught me so much about the potential for our species to work together, to push the boundaries of what's possible." Patrick gestured to Pollux, who stepped into view. Together, they unveiled a sleek device. "This is the fruit of human and Sheliak collaboration, a quantum entanglement communicator that will revolutionize faster-than-light communication. And we're offering this technology freely to all Sheliak as a gesture of friendship and trust." Gasps of amazement rippled through the audience. The angry shouts in the streets turned to murmurs of interest and excitement. As the broadcast ended, Patrick and Pollux clasped hands, grinning at each other in relief. "We did it!" Pollux exclaimed. "We sure did," Patrick replied. "I think we might have actually turned things around." But across the city, in a dimly lit room, Rigel seethed with rage. His eyes gleamed with a dangerous light as he turned to his followers. "Prepare the device," he snarled. "If these fools won't see reason, we'll make them see. The human dies tonight." Rigel's eyes glinted with malice as he put the final touches on his sabotage of the reactor core. His fingers danced across the control panel, inputting commands that would send the facility into meltdown. A savage grin spread across his face as he imagined Patrick's demise. "Soon, human," he hissed. "Soon you'll be nothing but atoms scattered to the wind." Rigel composed himself, smoothing his features into a mask of calm professionalism as he went to collect Patrick and Pollux. He found them chatting amiably in the facility's waiting area. "Gentlemen," Rigel said with forced politeness, "if you'll follow me, I'd be honored to show you our latest power generation technology." As they walked through the gleaming corridors of the reactor complex, Rigel feigned interest in Patrick's excited questions about Sheliak engineering. They passed through security checkpoints, Rigel's clearance granting them access to restricted areas. Just as they reached the main control room, a piercing alarm split the air. Red warning lights began to flash as panicked voices erupted from the facility's communication system. "What's happening?" Patrick shouted over the din. Rigel's face was a study in false concern. "It appears we have a serious malfunction. The reactor core is approaching critical overload." Pollux's eyes widened in horror. "But that would mean total destruction of the capital if we can't stop it," Rigel finished grimly. He turned to Patrick, his voice steady. "There's only one way to prevent catastrophe. Someone must enter the core chamber and manually disengage it. The radiation exposure would be Fatal. Patrick's teeth clenched. There has to be another way. We can override the system, initiate emergency shutdown protocols. I'm afraid not, Rigel said, shaking his head. Our only option is manual intervention. As Patrick and Pollux frantically worked at the control panels, trying to find an alternative, Rigel discreetly disabled their access and slipped out of the room. Patrick's shoulders slumped as realization dawned. Pollux, I'm sorry. Before Pollux could react, Patrick's fist connected with his jaw. The Sheliak crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Forgive me, my friend, Patrick whispered. He grabbed a radiation suit from a nearby locker and sealed himself inside. With trembling hands, he input the access code for the reactor chamber. As Patrick stepped through the airlock, Pollux stirred. He blinked groggily, then bolted upright as he saw Patrick disappearing behind the thick shielding door. No! Pollux screamed, pounding his fists against the barrier. Patrick, don't do this! Patrick's voice crackled over the intercom. It's the only way, Pollux. I can't let your people die when I have the power to save them. Pollux pressed his face against the small window, watching in anguish as Patrick made his way towards the pulsing reactor core. The human's movements were steady, purposeful. Promise me something, Patrick said, his breath labored. Don't let this be for nothing. Keep fighting for unity between our peoples. And tell my family, tell them I love them, that I'm proud of what I did here. Pollux nodded, tears streaming down his face. I promise, I swear it, Patrick. As Patrick reached for the manual override, alarms blared even louder. Radiation levels spiked on the monitoring equipment. Pollux watched helplessly as his friend's body began to slump. Yet Patrick's face remained serene, even as the life drained from him. His final act was one of supreme sacrifice, proof that humans were capable of nobility beyond measure. Pollux sank to his knees, overwhelmed by grief and the weight of the vow he'd just made. He knew that honoring Patrick's memory would be the work of a lifetime. Pollux stood motionless before the reactor chamber, his hands pressed against the thick glass. The alarms had long since silenced, but the echo of Patrick's final words reverberated in his mind. He blinked, his eyes dry and raw from hours of unrelenting grief. A gentle hand touched his shoulder. Sir, we need to clear the area. Pollux nodded numbly, allowing himself to be led away from the sight of his friend's sacrifice. As he stumbled through the facility's corridors, the weight of Patrick's last request settled on him like a physical burden. In the days that followed, Pollux threw himself into the task of honoring Patrick's memory. He combed through hours of security footage, piecing together a visual record of Patrick's time on the Sheliak homeworld. Each frame brought a fresh wave of pain, but also strengthened Pollux's determination. His first public appearance came just a week after the incident. Pollux stood before a packed auditorium, his voice steady as he recounted Patrick's heroism. I watched as this human, this outsider we had treated with such suspicion, willingly gave his life to save our people, Pollux said, his words carried across the planet via live broadcast. Is this the action of a savage race, of a species unworthy of our trust? The crowd murmured, many shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Pollux activated a holographic display, showing Patrick's final moments in the reactor chamber. The human's face, serene even in the face of certain death, filled the screen. Look at him, Pollux urged. See the nobility in his sacrifice. This is the true face of humanity. Despite Pollux's impassioned pleas, resistance to his message was fierce and immediate. Rigel and his followers mounted a vicious counter-campaign, flooding the media with images of human conflicts and atrocities. The human's death was nothing more than a ploy, Rigel shouted at a rally, his face contorted with hate. A calculated move to lull us into a false sense of security. We must sever all ties with Earth before it's too late. Pollux refused to be silenced. He traveled across the Sheliak homeworld, speaking to any who would listen. In small town halls and bustling city centers, he shared stories of Patrick's kindness, his curiosity, his unwavering belief in the potential for cooperation between their species. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the tide began to turn. Moderate Shellyacs, moved by Patrick's sacrifice and Pollux's tireless advocacy, began to speak out in favor of continued human-Shellyak relations. Rigel, sensing his influence waning, grew desperate. On the eve of a crucial vote on the future of the cultural exchange program, he made his move. Pollux was ambushed as he left a public forum, Rigel's thugs dragging him into a deserted alley. "You've become a problem, Pollux," Rigel snarled, brandishing a weapon. "It's time we put an end to your misguided crusade." But Rigel had overplayed his hand. Unbeknownst to him, his attack on Pollux was captured by security cameras. As the footage spread, public opinion turned sharply against Rigel and his extremist views. In the ensuing investigation, evidence of Rigel's involvement in the reactor sabotage came to light. The Shellyak authorities moved swiftly, arresting Rigel and his core supporters. With the shadow of Rigel's influence lifted, the Shellyak government made a bold move. They announced the renewal of the cultural exchange program, inviting a new team of human participants to the homeworld. Pollux insisted on personally greeting the human delegation. As the shuttle doors opened, revealing the faces of Earth's representatives, Pollux's gaze fell on a young man with familiar features. His breath caught in his throat as he realized who stood before him. "David," Pollux said softly, extending his hand. "You look so much like him." David's eyes widened in recognition. "You're Pollux, my brother. He spoke of you often in his transmissions home." Pollux nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Patrick was the finest being I've ever known, human or Shellyak. His sacrifice changed everything for us." As they walked together towards the orientation center, Pollux recounted the events that had unfolded since Patrick's death. David listened intently, his eyes shining with unshed tears and fierce pride. "Patrick always believed our peoples could achieve greatness together," Pollux said as they reached the center's entrance. "Now, with your help, we have the chance to make his dream a reality." David squared his shoulders, a determined set to his jaw that was achingly familiar to Pollux. "Then let's get to work," he said. "We've got a lot to learn from each other." Pollux smiled, feeling for the first time since Patrick's death that the future held real promise. As he led David and the other humans into the heart of Shellyak society, he silently renewed his vow to his lost friend. The bridge between their species would be built, no matter the challenges that lay ahead. David stood at the viewport, gazing out at the alien skyline of the Shellyak capital. The towering spires and crystalline structures still filled him with awe, even after months on this world. He pressed his hand against the cool glass, lost in thought. "Your brother loved that view too," Pollux said softly, stepping up beside him. David turned, a sad smile on his face. "I wish I could have seen it through his eyes." Pollux placed a comforting hand on David's shoulder. He saw it with wonder and hope, just as you do now. The lab around them hummed with activity as Shellyak scientists bustled about, their movements precise and efficient. David took a deep breath, straightening his shoulders. "Let's get back to work," he said, moving to a nearby workstation. As days turned to weeks, David threw himself into his studies with fervor. He pored over Shellyak texts, absorbing complex theories on quantum mechanics and energy manipulation. His mind raced with possibilities, connecting ideas in ways that left even the most brilliant Shellyak scientists stunned. One evening, as David tinkered with a prototype quantum circuit, Pollux approached his workbench. "You've been at this for hours," Pollux said, concern evident in his voice. "Perhaps it's time for a break?" David looked up, dark circles under his eyes. "I can't stop, Pollux. Not when we're so close to a breakthrough. Patrick gave everything for this. I have to make it count." Pollux's expression softened. "Patrick's sacrifice wasn't about pushing you to exhaustion. It was about opening doors, creating opportunities for understanding between our peoples." David's hand stilled on the delicate components. "I know, it's just, sometimes the weight of it all is too much to bear alone," Pollux finished. He gently took the tools from David's hands. Come, let's walk in the gardens. I want to tell you about the time Patrick tried to explain the concept of knock-knock jokes to a group of very confused Sheliak diplomats. As they strolled through the bioluminescent flora, David found himself laughing for the first time in weeks. The burden on his shoulders began to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Months passed, and David's innovations in Sheliak technology began to attract attention. His proposed improvements to their energy grid increased efficiency by 37%. His redesign of their quantum communication arrays doubled transmission speeds. In a high-ceilinged laboratory, David stood before a holographic display, gesturing animatedly as he explained his latest concept to a rapt audience of Sheliak scientists. By combining your precision in subspace field manipulation with our understanding of wormhole dynamics, we could create a stable transit corridor between Earth and the Sheliak homeworld, David said, his eyes bright with excitement. Murmurs of interest rippled through the crowd. One Sheliak raised a hand, its crystalline appendage glinting in the light. The energy requirements for such a system would be astronomical, it stated. The risks of destabilization? David nodded, already anticipating the concern. That's where the beauty of this design comes in. We use a cascading series of micro-wormholes, each one reinforcing the next. It's like, imagine a bridge made of thousands of interlocking strands. Any one strand might snap, but together they form an unbreakable whole. The explanation sparked a flurry of discussion among the Sheliak. Pollux beamed with pride, seeing Patrick's vision of collaboration coming to life through his brother. Weeks of intense preparation led to the day of the first test. David and Pollux stood before the towering apparatus, a whirling vortex of energy contained within shimmering force fields. Are you ready? Pollux asked, his hand hovering over the activation switch. David took a deep breath, nodding. Let's make history. The machine hummed to life, energy levels climbing rapidly. For a moment, it seemed as though success was within reach. Then, a warning klaxon blared. Containment field destabilizing, a Sheliak technician shouted. David's eyes widened as he saw the readings on the monitor. Without hesitation, he shoved Pollux away from the console. Get out of here, David yelled, his fingers flying over the controls. Pollux stumbled back, horror dawning on his face. David, no! But it was too late. The containment field ruptured, flooding the chamber with exotic radiation. David felt his skin burning, his very atoms seeming to unravel. As consciousness began to fade, a desperate idea formed in David's mind. With the last of his strength, he input a series of commands, triggering a subatomic pulse. The world went white, then black. David's eyes snapped open. He found himself floating in a translucent pod, surrounded by a swirling mist of nanobots. Pollux's face appeared above him, a mix of relief and amazement. Welcome back, Pollux said, his voice thick with emotion. As David emerged from the pod, he felt different, stronger, faster. His mind raced with clarity he'd never experienced before. What happened to me? David asked, flexing his fingers in wonder. Pollux's eyes widened. You've been changed, David. The radiation, the pulse. It's transformed you on a fundamental level. You're something entirely new. David looked down at his hands, seeing faint lines of energy coursing beneath his skin. He reached out, effortlessly lifting a heavy piece of equipment with one arm. This is incredible, David breathed. The implications for our research. Pollux nodded eagerly. It's beyond anything we could have imagined. You've become living proof of what our species can achieve together. As news of David's transformation spread, reactions among the Sheliak were mixed. Some hailed it as a miracle, a new chapter in interspecies cooperation. Others whispered of the dangers, the unpredictability of human nature now amplified beyond measure. In the heart of the Sheliak capital, a group of conservative leaders gathered in hushed conference. This human has become too powerful, one said, its crystalline form pulsing with agitation. We cannot allow such an unknown quantity to remain unchecked. Another countered, But think of the advancements we could make with his help. The human's brother opened our eyes to new possibilities. Now, this one could revolutionize our entire society. As the debate raged on, David stood once more at the viewport, gazing out at the alien world that had become his home. He felt the pulse of newfound power thrumming through his veins and wondered what challenges lay ahead in this brave new future. The Sheliak capital buzzed with unrest as news of David's transformation spread like wildfire. In the halls of power, Grilaz paced back and forth, his crystalline form pulsing with agitation. "This human abomination must be contained," Grilaz declared to his inner circle. "Its very existence threatens everything we've built." Without hesitation, Grilaz activated a secure comm channel. "Deploy all available units. Find the human and bring him in. Use whatever force necessary." In their research lab, David and Pollux worked feverishly, unaware of the storm brewing outside. David's fingers flew across holographic displays, manipulating complex equations with newfound ease. "Pollux, look at this," David said, excitement in his voice. "If we recalibrate the quantum matrix, we could increase power output by 300%. Before Pollux could respond, the lab doors exploded inward. Armed Sheliak agents poured through the opening, weapons trained on David. "Surrender, human!" the lead agent shouted. David's enhanced reflexes kicked in. He vaulted over a workstation, narrowly avoiding a stun blast. Pollux moved to intervene but was quickly subdued. "David, run!" Pollux yelled as agents pinned him to the ground. Heart racing, David sprinted through the facility. He dodged energy bolts and leapt over obstacles with inhuman agility. Reaching a service exit, he burst out into the alien cityscape. David ran for what felt like hours, weaving through crowded streets and ducking into shadows. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the sudden turn of events. He needed to contact Earth, warn them of what was happening. Slipping into an abandoned building, David accessed a public terminal. His fingers danced across the interface, attempting to bypass security protocols and reach the interstellar transceiver. An error message flashed across the screen. "No," David muttered, trying again and again. "They've cut off all off-world communications." The reality of his situation sank in. He was alone on an alien world, hunted, with no way to call for help. Days passed as David evaded capture, staying on the move and using his enhanced abilities to stay one step ahead of the hunter-killer squads. He overheard snippets of conversation, piecing together the extent of Grilaz's operation. During a close call with a patrol, David ducked into a narrow alley. A hand grabbed his shoulder, and he spun, ready to fight. "Wait," a voice hissed. "I'm here to help." David found himself face-to-face with a Sheliak he didn't recognize. The alien's crystalline form seemed to shimmer with nervous energy. "I'm Korax," the Sheliak said. "I worked with the human resistance years ago. We need to talk." In a hidden safe house, Korax shared what he knew about Grilaz's plans and Pollux's whereabouts. David listened intently, his enhanced mind already formulating a rescue plan. "It's too dangerous," Korax protested. "The biolab is heavily guarded." David's eyes flashed with perseverance. "I'm not leaving Pollux behind." Under cover of darkness, David and Korax infiltrated the biolab complex. Alarms blared as they fought their way through security checkpoints. David moved with blinding speed, disarming guards before they could react. They found Pollux strapped to an examination table, surrounded by Sheliak scientists. David made short work of the guards, while Korax worked to free Pollux. "David!" Pollux gasped, relief evident in his voice. "You came!" As they raced toward the exit, Grilaz's voice boomed over the facility's speakers. "You leave me no choice, human," Grilaz snarled. "If I can't contain you, I'll destroy you." The ground beneath their feet began to tremble. David's enhanced senses picked up a low-frequency hum emanating from deep within the planet. "He's activated some kind of weapon," David shouted. "We need to move now." They burst out of the biolab, alarms wailing behind them. The very air seemed to crackle with energy as Grilaz's high-stakes endeavor unfolded. The ground shook violently beneath their feet as David, Pollux and Corax raced toward their escape vessel. Suddenly, a deafening roar filled the air, and the sky lit up with an eerie, pulsing glow. "Oh, what's happening?" Pollux shouted over the din. David's enhanced senses kicked into overdrive. He felt a surge of energy rippling through the planet's crust, originating from deep within its core. His eyes widened as he realized the magnitude of the threat. "Gorillas!" he growled. "He's weaponized the planet itself." A wave of searing energy erupted from the ground, vaporizing everything in its path. David threw himself in front of his companions, shielding them with his body. The blast hit him full force, and he screamed in agony as his very atoms began to vibrate and destabilize. Pollux watched in horror as David's skin seemed to ripple and distort. "David, we need to get you out of here." But David stood his ground, gritting his teeth against the pain. His mind raced, analyzing the energy patterns bombarding him. Each pulse grew stronger, more focused. He knew he couldn't withstand this assault for long. "There's no time," David gasped. "The next wave will tear us apart at the subatomic level. We need to create a wormhole now." Corax's crystalline form trembled. "But how? We don't have the equipment." "We don't need it," David interrupted. He grabbed Pollux and Corax's hands, forming a circle. "I'm going to link our minds. Focus on the space between pulses. Picture the tiniest gap in reality." David's consciousness expanded, enveloping his companions. Pollux and Corax gasped as their minds were flooded with cosmic awareness. They saw the fabric of space-time stretched before them, pulsing with each energy wave. "Now!" David shouted as he sensed the momentary lull between pulses. Their combined will punched through reality itself. The world around them warped and twisted, then vanished in a blinding flash. They tumbled through a realm of pure energy, their bodies dispersing into clouds of subatomic particles. David felt his consciousness expand exponentially, drinking in the raw power of creation. With a thought, he gathered their essences and propelled them back toward the Sheliak homeworld. They streaked across light years in seconds, riding waves of gravitational force. They rematerialized in the heart of the chaos they'd left behind. The planet was in turmoil, buildings crumbling as waves of destructive energy pulsed outward from the core. David raised his hands, his body glowing with newfound power. He focused his will, and the air before him shimmered. A sphere of absolute darkness formed, growing rapidly. "What are you doing?" Pollux asked, awestruck. "Containing the blast," David replied, his voice resonating with cosmic force. "I'm creating a graviton sphere to trap the energy." The pulsing waves of destruction struck the sphere and vanished. David grunted with effort as he compressed the captured energy further and further, until it was no larger than a pinhead. As the immediate threat subsided, David turned to his companions. His eyes blazed with dedication and power beyond mortal comprehension. "Now," he said, his voice echoing with the weight of galaxies, "it's time we dealt with Gorillas." Gorillas. The name burned in David's mind as he faced the Sheliak leader responsible for the chaos unfolding around them. The air crackled with energy, remnants of the cataclysmic barrage that had nearly torn the planet apart. David felt power surging through every atom of his being. He was no longer just a man. He had become something more, a conduit for cosmic forces beyond mortal comprehension. With a thought, he stretched out his awareness, feeling the ebb and flow of space-time itself. "Pollux, Corax, stay behind me," David commanded, his voice resonating with newfound authority. He raised his hands, focusing his will. The very fabric of reality warped around Pollux and Corax, forming an impenetrable barrier of gravitomolecular forces. The two Sheliak gasped as they found themselves encased in a shimmering cocoon of energy. Gorillas snarled, his crystalline form pulsing with rage. "You think your parlor tricks can stop me, human?" He gestured to a massive array of machinery behind him. "Behold the true power of Sheliak science." The disruptor array hummed to life, unleashing a torrent of energy that tore at the very foundations of matter. David stood unflinching as the waves washed over him, feeling them tickle at his subatomic structure. With a mere thought, David opened a localized wormhole directly in front of him. The destructive energy poured into the spatial anomaly, disappearing from view. David's eyes gleamed as he redirected the wormhole's exit, turning Grilaz's weapon against itself. The disruptor array buckled and twisted as its own energy tore it apart from within. Grilaz stumbled back, his face contorted in disbelief. "Impossible!" he shrieked. But David wasn't finished. He reached out with his mind, grasping the gravitational fields that permeated the planet. With a twist of cosmic will, he collapsed those fields inward, crushing the remains of Grilaz's weapon into a dense ball of hyper-compressed matter no larger than a grain of sand. Grilaz's eyes darted wildly, desperation evident in every facet of his crystalline form. "You leave me no choice," he hissed, activating a hidden control panel. The ground beneath their feet trembled as distant alarms blared. David's enhanced senses detected a shift in the cosmic balance, a disturbance in the very fabric of space-time. "What have you done?" David demanded. Grilaz laughed maniacally. "If I can't defeat you here, I'll bring the stars themselves down upon your head." David's awareness expanded outward, racing across light years in an instant. He felt the pull of entire planetary systems, wrenched from their orbits and hurled towards a single point, his location. Time seemed to slow as David's mind raced. He could see the trajectories of dozens of worlds, each on a collision course that would obliterate not just him, but the entire Shiliak homeworld. David took a deep breath, centering himself in the cosmic flow. He reached out, altering his own quantum resonance to match the incoming planets. As the first world hurtled towards him, David felt every atom, every particle that comprised its mass. With surgical precision, David disassembled the planet's matter stream, guiding each component safely around the Shiliak homeworld. As the danger passed, he reassembled the planet, intact and whole, sending it off on a mirrored trajectory that canceled its momentum. Again and again, David repeated this process, unmaking and remaking entire worlds in the blink of an eye. Pollux and Corax watched in awe as planet after planet materialized in the sky above them, only to vanish moments later. Grilaz staggered, the strain of his failed gambit evident in his weakened form, but a manic gleam still burned in his eyes. "You may command the stars," he spat, "but can you command the very void itself?" With trembling hands, Grilaz activated a final failsafe, a device no larger than a fist whirred to life, its surface an impossible black that seemed to devour light itself. David's eyes widened as he sensed the cosmic disturbance emanating from the device. "A proto-singularity generator," he breathed. The air itself began to warp and twist as a microscopic black hole formed, its event horizon expanding at an exponential rate. David felt the pull of its gravity, threatening to tear apart not just the planet, but the entire galactic quadrant. "Pollux, Corax," David called out, his voice strained with effort. "I need your help." The two Shiliaks stepped forward without hesitation. David reached out, linking their minds and sharing his cosmic awareness. Together, they formed a triumvirate of wills, a hyper-singularity to counter Grilaz's doomsday device. As Grilaz's singularity tore holes in the fabric of space-time, David, Pollux, and Corax worked in perfect unison to seal the breaches. Reality itself became their canvas as they reshaped the cosmic order, their combined consciousness spanning eons in the space between heartbeats. At last, David sensed an opening. With a final surge of will, he collapsed Grilaz's singularity, compressing it into a pocket universe no larger than a subatomic particle. He encased this prison in a subspace stasis field, sealing away Grilaz and his fanatical ambitions for all eternity. The cosmic maelstrom subsided, leaving an eerie calm in its wake. David felt the immense power that had coursed through him begin to ebb, his form shifting back to a semblance of his former self. He turned to Pollux and Corax, a weary smile on his face. "It's over," he said simply. Pollux stepped forward, his crystalline form gleaming with a new light. "No, my friend," he replied. It's just beginning. As the three of them surveyed the battered but unbroken Sheliak homeworld, David knew that the real work lay ahead. Together, human and Sheliak would forge a new future, one built on the limitless potential of their combined strengths. The cosmic maelstrom subsided, leaving an eerie calm in its wake. David's transcendent form pulsed with raw energy, his very essence intertwined with the fabric of reality. Pollux and Korax stood in awe, their crystalline forms vibrating with residual power. As the dust settled on the Sheliak homeworld, an uneasy peace took hold. David's metamorphosis into a being of pure cosmic energy sent shockwaves through Sheliak society. Some, like Pollux and Korax, saw it as the pinnacle of human-Sheliak cooperation. "This is what we've always dreamed of," Pollux said, his voice filled with wonder. "The ultimate synthesis of our species." But not all Sheliak shared their optimism. Whispers of fear and resentment spread through the population like wildfire. David's godlike abilities shattered long-held beliefs about the natural order of the universe. In the shadows, a charismatic leader named Krugar emerged. His crystalline form gleamed with malevolent purpose as he addressed a growing crowd of fearful Sheliak. "Look at what this human has become," Krugar's voice boomed. "An abomination that defies the very laws of nature. Even now contained, his existence threatens to render us obsolete." Krugar's words resonated with those gripped by existential dread. Unbeknownst to many, he wielded subtle mind control technology, amplifying the fear and anger of his followers. As Krugar's influence grew, tensions escalated. The once unified Sheliak society fractured along ideological lines. David, Pollux, and Korax found themselves increasingly isolated as Krugar's rhetoric gained traction. Then came the night of the coup. Krugar's followers stormed the central governance hub, their weapons crackling with energy. David stood before the onslaught, his cosmic form a beacon in the chaos. "This isn't the way," David pleaded, his voice resonating on multiple planes of existence. "We can work together, grow together." But Krugar's zealots were beyond reason. They unleashed a barrage of energy weapons, each blast powerful enough to level a city block. David absorbed the attacks, his form rippling with the strain. Pollux and Korax fought alongside their human ally, their own abilities enhanced by their connection to David. Yet for every enemy they subdued, two more took their place. As the battle raged, the very foundations of the Sheliak homeworld trembled. David's cosmic awareness stretched to its limits, simultaneously defending against Krugar's forces and preventing the planet's destruction. "We can't keep this up forever," Korax shouted over the din of battle. Just as all seemed lost, a new presence made itself known. A Sheliak unlike any other materialized in their midst, his form ancient and weathered by eons of cosmic travel. "I am Arcturian," the newcomer announced, his voice carrying the weight of millennia. "And I bring with me our last hope." Arcturian revealed the existence of a hidden protocol, a failsafe created by the Sheliak ancestors, a way to open a transgalactic bridge, but at a terrible cost. David's cosmic consciousness grasped the implications immediately. To save the Sheliak who still believed in unity, he would have to sacrifice their homeworld. As Krugar's forces pressed in from all sides, David made his choice. With a heavy heart, he nodded to Arcturian. "Do it," David said, his voice echoing across dimensions. Arcturian began the intricate process of activating the Exodus protocol. The air hummed with building energy as a massive wormhole tore open the fabric of space-time. "Quickly," David urged, gesturing to Pollux, Korax, and the other pro-human Sheliak. "Through the bridge!" As they rushed toward the swirling vortex, Krugar's forces launched a desperate final assault. David stood at the threshold, his cosmic form a living shield. "Go!" he shouted to his friends. "I'll hold them back!" Pollux hesitated, torn between escape and loyalty. "David, we can't leave you!" "You must," David replied, his voice strained as he absorbed the full fury of Krugar's weapons. "I'll be right behind you." With one last anguished look, Pollux and Corax plunged into the wormhole. David followed, his consciousness stretched to its limits as he guided their trajectory through the cosmic void. They emerged in a primordial region of space, a celestial nursery where new stars were born. David's singularity matrix pulsed with creative energy, shaping the raw materials around them into the beginnings of a new Shellyak sanctuary. But their respite was short-lived. A final wave of energy ripped through the wormhole. Kruger's parting shot. Anti-singularity warheads, designed to unravel David's very being. David's form convulsed as the weapons struck home. His godlike consciousness, which had reshaped reality itself, began to fracture and collapse. Pollux and Corax watched in horror as their friend, their savior, imploded in a blinding flash of light. Where David had stood, only a tiny speck remained, an infinitesimal seed of near-infinite density. Pollux reached out, cradling the microscopic remnant of his friend. Tears formed in his crystalline eyes as he realized the enormity of David's sacrifice. "What now?" Corax asked, his voice heavy with grief. Pollux looked out at the cosmic nursery surrounding them, the building blocks of a new universe waiting to be shaped. "Now," Pollux said, his voice gaining strength, "we build. We create the world David dreamed of, a place where humans and Shellyak can truly become one." As they set to work, guided by the infinitesimal spark of David's essence, Pollux knew that their greatest challenge and their greatest adventure lay ahead.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.